Swedish yet. And I would also say that this presentation, it builds on a proposal that my colleague Isak Stoddard, who sat in the front here and speaks perfect Swedish, so if you have any difficult questions, you can aim them at Isak. So it builds on a proposal that we have made to the Climate Parliament about what we think is necessary for the Swedish climate change law to do, some refinements to that law. Is this echoing? Is it okay? It's okay. Right. So I call this presentation from Paris to Sweden, 2 degrees centigrade integrity, and that's a really important word there, honesty, integrity, and the climate law. And I won't be focusing today so much on the mitigation, on the actual reductions, but I'm trying to focus on what Sweden needs to do in its legislation if it is to deliver on Paris. So, what is our mitigation, our carbon reduction commitments in Sweden? What are they? Well, we have signed in Sweden, indeed all of the EU and almost every country in the world, we've signed up to the Paris Agreement, something that hopefully you're all very familiar with. And this has established an unprecedented international agenda, a covenant, an agreement, a commitment, not a target, but a commitment, an obligation, a duty, that has committed us to take action, and that's also important. It's not just to talk about it or to put legislation in place, it is actually to act. To hold the increase in global average temperature below a 2 degrees C rise above pre-industrial levels, and ideally aim for 1.5 degrees centigrade. And it's worth bearing in mind that 2 degrees centigrade, if you live in Sweden or indeed in the UK, doesn't seem too much of a concern, but this is a global average. That's about 5 or 6 degrees difference in the poles. It will have major regional implications around the world. Let's also be clear, at 2 degrees centigrade, many people will die. They'll be poor, there'll be low emitters that take no responsibility for this. They'll live a long way from Sweden or the UK, and they'll typically be non-white. And we have known this for over a quarter of a century. So we have known who we are going to kill. We may not know their names, but we know them. We know their communities. So let's be quite clear. This is an existential problem that we are facing for many people around the world, and that's why those people have asked people like us to aim for 1.5 degrees centigrade, not 2. But also to do this on the basis of the best science that is available. And very importantly, on the basis of equity. And I will come back to that later because this new Swedish climate change law takes virtually no account of equity. In fact, it is highly inequitable. Indeed, the Climate Change Act in the UK from 2008 is similarly inequitable, and I will try to show that later. But I had expected much more of Sweden than I had expected of the UK. So what is our response to this challenge so far? Well, I think it's important to start off with some humility, to be honest about where we are today, rather than to pretend we are doing something. So the first IPCC report, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, came out in 1990. Now, when I'm talking to students, I always point out that it's before their parents had met. Now, that's probably true for some of you here. So for large parts of your lives, if not all of your lives, we have known everything we needed to know about climate change to do something about it. And yet in 2016, the carbon dioxide emissions were 60% higher than in 1990, 60%. And in 2017, they went up by about 1.5%. So despite lots of optimistic rhetoric by people with grey hair, no hair, or dyed hair, people of my generation, we have failed, abject failure of people like me. And I think if you're between the ages of sort of 25 and 5, then you should be really angry at people like me. You'll see them walking around here today and other people elsewhere as well, your own parents, that we have knowingly chosen to let you down. So let's hear your voices much more loudly than we have done. Why have we failed? We have had a whole litany, it's a Swedish word here, I think it's wonderful. Spindlery. Is that how you pronounce it? Which we use swindling or cons or fraud. This is what my generation has been doing for 25 years. We've had offsetting, paying the poor to diet for us. Fly to a conference and plant some trees, or fly to a conference and pay some money for poor people to have solar panels. We have the Clean Development Mechanism, which is state-sanctioned offsetting. We have the emissions trading scheme in Europe. With so many permits, the price of carbon remains almost zero. We've got afforestation people are talking about now. Plant a tree, expand an airport. Just look what Sweden's planning to do. When all of this fails, which it inevitably will do and has done, we are going to rely, and I'll talk about these briefly later, negative emission technologies. These dominate the advice that governments receive from the climate community now. This is technologies that do not exist, that will have to suck carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere in the future. The carbon dioxide we cannot be bothered to stop putting there today. And these will have to be used across the rest of the century. They are really important, if you're not aware of them, to understand what they are. And when all of that fails, because it will do, we're going to have geoengineering. There are scientists all around the world now planning to fire rockets into space to spread sulfates into the stratosphere to reflect sunlight back out into space to cool our planet.